Hi guys, welcome to Mrs. B Teaches English, and today we are looking at the poem Vultures by Chinua Achebe. So a little bit of history on Chinua. He was born in 1930 and he's really seen as the father of modern African writing. He's one of Africa's greatest writers and we really do celebrate him. Then he was born in Nigeria, and we see that he grew up listening to a lot of stories. There was a very rich oral storytelling tradition, and perhaps that is where he found his passion for fiction. Then he was a brilliant student, won a scholarship to study medicine, but decided to later study literature instead. He was also very active in war and politics, and later we see he moved to the US where he lived and worked as a professor of languages and literature until his death in 2013. So I always tell my students that this poem is really a wonderful little poem about evil, right? And if you can remember this image, you are going to understand what this poem is all about. And basically what it says is that within everything that is evil, there is also good. And within everything that is good, there is also the potential to evil or bad. So as long as you remember this, you will be fine when analyzing this poem. So let's read through it together. Vultures. In the greyness and drizzle of one despondent dawn, unstirred by harbingers of sunbreak, a vulture perching high on broken bones of a dead tree nestled close to his mate, his smooth bashed-in head a pebble on a stem rooted in a dump of gross feathers, inclined affectionately to hers. Yesterday they picked the eyes of a swollen corpse in a water-lodged trench and ate the things in its bowel. Full-gorged they choose their roost, keeping the hollow remnant in easy range of cold, telescopic eyes. Strange, indeed, how love, in other ways so particular, will pick a corner in that charnel house, tidy it, and coil up there, perhaps even fall asleep, her face turned to the wall. Thus the commandant at Belsen camp, going home for the day, with fumes of human roast clinging rebelliously to his hairy nostrils, will stop at the wayside sweet shop and pick up a chocolate for his tender offspring, waiting at home for daddy's return. Praise bounteous Providence, if you will, that grants even an ogre a tiny glowworm tenderness encapsulated in icy caverns of a cruel heart, or else despair, for in the very germ of that kindred love is lodged the perpetuity of evil. So, if we were to summarize this poem, it really begins with a very graphic and unpleasant description of a pair of vultures who nestle lovingly together after feasting on a corpse. The poet comments on the strangeness of love existing in places where one would not expect it, and he then goes on to consider the love a concentration camp commandant shows to his family, having spent the day burning human corpses. He buys his child sweets on the way home. And then the ending or conclusion of the poem is very ambiguous or two-sided. On the one hand, Achebe praises God and Providence, that even the cruelest of creatures can show love. And on the other hand, these creatures show love for their families only, and so allow themselves to commit cruel acts towards others. So he leaves us with a choice, whether we want to be happy that even evil people can do good, or whether we want to be sad that good people can do very evil things. If we look at the title, Vultures, we see it is a literal reference to the scavenging bird species described in the very first section of the poem, but it's also a metaphorical reference to people who commit evil deeds. Now, I want to just give you some factual information about the birds, the vultures. They are really one of the environment's most necessary but often overlooked creatures. So they are very intelligent, and they are equipped to keep the environment clean, and they help to prevent the spread of disease. Some facts about these birds: they don't go after healthy animals, but they will attack injured and dying animals. And they are, of course, most famous for being nature's cleanup crew, as they mainly feed on carcasses of dead animals, which can sound very disgusting and gross to us, but by consuming diseased animals, for example, vultures prevent the spread of life-threatening diseases, such as rabies, to other animals and also to humans. They also mate for life, which is, I think, absolutely so romantic. But, of course, they have this very unusual habit of defecating on their own legs to cool them by evaporation, which does make them seem a little less appealing. And then, of course, we always associate these animals with evil and death and impending doom. So if we take a look at the type and the form or the structure of this poem, we see it's a free verse with no fixed rhyme scheme. There are no formal stanzas, but this poem is divided into sections, and we're going to look at that. It's indicated through the ellipses and also through indentation. Then we find enjambment, which really makes this seem as ideas that are flowing. He's thinking of these vultures, and then it reminds him of the commandant, and then it makes him come to this realization, which he puts to the reader in the form of a question. There are very short lines, although the sentences that are being enjambed are very long, and this gives a very chaotic feeling. Then some significant themes that we identify: the paradoxical nature of human beings, who have the capacity to love intensely while at the same time commit unspeakable horrors. Then the fact that ordinary people commit terrible deeds under certain conditions, like the commandant, and this strange coexistence of gross evil and tender love in the same person. They are not mutually exclusive. For the different sections, I want you to make a note on the tone. In section 1, which is then line 1 to 21, there's a tone of disgust and revulsion. The speaker describes the dreary day and the ugly vultures relaxing after a meal of rotting flesh. Section 2, which is then line 22 to 29, is of puzzlement. The speaker is really confused that love could find a place in a heart of such an ugly creature. Then section 3, in line 30 to 40, there's a tone of horror. The speaker contrasts the unimaginable evil that the commandant is guilty of with his feelings of tender kindness for his children. And then finally, section 4, that's line 41 to 51, is resigned and pessimistic. The speaker offers a choice of being thankful for the capacity to love, or a feeling of despair because the capacity for evil seems to coexist with it. So you cannot have either just one or the other, or eliminate one or the other. If we were to divide this poem into different parts again, then your section 1 is really the description of the vultures. Section 2 is commenting on the strangeness of feelings of love between such disgusting creatures. Section 3, the description of the Belsenkamp commandant. And section 4 is the reflection on the two sides of human nature. Let's look at a line-by-line analysis now. So section 1 says, in the grayness and drizzle of one despondent dawn, unstirred by harbingers of sunbreak, a vulture. Okay, so grayness there creates, and also drizzle, creates this depressing start to the poem. And then, of course, we have the alliteration of the D, drizzle, and despondent. It emphasizes the grimness. And we find personification in the phrase despondent dawn, meaning the sad sunrise. The dawn is personified as being a sad person. So this poem really starts out very dreary on a sad note. It's absolutely miserable. And the personification emphasizes this gloomy atmosphere. The fact that it's unstirred means that there is no movement, emphasizing the lack of activity. It's quiet. And then we have the harbingers of sunbreak. So a harbinger is a messenger, and usually birds are the messengers or the announcers of the arrival of dawn. That's the first thing you hear in the morning, is the birds saying, "It's morning, wake up." But on this day, it's so quiet and depressing that even the birds were not signaling the morning. Then we continue line 5 to 8. A vulture perching high on broken bones of a dead tree nestled close to his mate. So trees are usually associated with life, but here we see that this tree is described as broken bones of a dead tree. So again we have alliteration of the B here, and that together with the word dead highlights the sterility of the environment. The tree is compared to a carcass, and its bare bleached branches have been picked clean by the vultures, and this really emphasizes the negative effect that we associate with the vultures and their presence in their surroundings. So we have this dead tree in this quiet, sterile morning. And in this dead tree, we have a vulture nestled close to his mate. So nestling is an act like cuddling. And we don't associate vultures with love and cuddling and affection. They are usually used to symbolize death and decomposition. So there's a stark contrast between what we expect and what we find here. Then we find a description of the vulture. His smooth, bashed-in head, a pebble on a stem rooted in a dump of gross feathers. So, bashed in suggests that something has perhaps been damaged or harmed. But here it is not meant literally, it's meant figuratively to indicate the association with violence. Then his head and his neck is being compared to a stem or a pebble on a stem that is rooted in a dump of gross feathers. So it's almost like you have a rock on a stem in a dump of gross feathers. This really depicts the revolting and ugly physical side of the vultures that the speaker is trying to portray. Then the words dump and gross. The speaker is disgusted by the sight of the vultures and shows his rejection of what they symbolize. And we see that they are inclined in affectionately. Again, there's an attraction between these two birds, and an affection that we don't expect to find with birds that are associated with evil and disgusting habits. So it's completely opposite to what we would expect in this context. I'm going to show you a photo to make this image clearer to you. The first one looks like this. So there we have the broken bones of the dead tree, and in it there's a vulture. Of course, there are only two, and they are nestled affectionately, showing some love to each other. Then here's the pebble, small rock that is on the stem, and it's almost like it's forced into a bunch of feathers. and they are making way for the stem. So he's described as being inclined affectionately to hers. And then we see something about their habits. Yesterday they picked the eyes of a swollen corpse in a waterlogged trench and ate the things in its bowel. And if that does not disgust you, I don't know what will. Achebe really gives this extremely distasteful description of how the vultures had the day before fed on a dead animal. And the phrases picked the eyes and swollen corpse are disgusting. He really goes on to relate that these birds ate the contents of an animal's intestines too. And they had eaten until they were fully gorged. Now, the word swollen and waterlogged indicates that it has probably been lying there for quite some time. And this extremely distasteful description of how the vultures had fed on this dead animal shocks the reader. We know that these animals are scavengers and that they tend to eat dead carcasses, but it still shocks the reader in the way that Achebe describes it. Here's a picture of what he was describing. So now, full gorged, so their stomachs are full, they chose their roost, keeping the hollowed remnant in easy range of telescopic eyes. So of course they feel drowsy because they've been eating, and you know when your stomach is full you tend to feel all drowsy, and they decide to cuddle up. They chose their roost, the place where they would sleep. But it's not that far from where they were eating, because they're keeping this hollowed remnant, what was left of the carcass, in close range of their eyes. Now, the phrase cold telescopic eyes really introduces this idea of machinery or something that has no feelings, and it highlights the cold human behavior which caused the corpse to be in the range of the vultures of the first place, because something or someone had to kill it for it to become this corpse that they could feast on. Now we move on to section 2, and remember I said that the sections are indicated through either an indentation or an ellipsis. And here we see there is this indentation in front of strange, and then strange is placed on a line of its own, really forcing the reader to stop and think, and it emphasizes the oddity of the description that follows in the stanza. He says, "Strange indeed, how love in other ways so particular will pick a corner in a charnel house, tidy it up, and coil up there." So love is really personified in this section. Love is seen to pick a corner and tidy up and fall asleep, and it's given the human characteristic. It is in a sharp contrast to the rotting corpse and the death mentioned in the first section of this poem. This idea really marks a shift in the poem's focus, away from the vultures, and then the second section ends, however, with a remark that if this happened, love's face would be turned to the wall, presumably to avoid the sight of this skeletal remains, to avoid this dreadful image that has been created. The exclamation mark at the end really emphasizes that love can't stand to look at these atrocities that are contained within. Now, just to put this into context for you, a charnel house is a place where bodies are kept, or dead bodies, corpses are kept, and it really contrasts the light that we associate with love by introducing the dark of death. This section is also used to connect to the idea presented about the concentration camp and the corpses that were burned there, by having the idea of the charnel house where the vultures now nestle up together after they have eaten on the dead corpse. So here's a picture of one example of a charnel house. And you can really see this is an absolutely horrific image. Then again, we have the introduction of a new section, and we have it with the ellipses in front and the connector here, the logical connector, thus. So we again have what we said in the beginning there, this flow of ideas. He starts off with the picture of the vultures, and then it reminds the speaker of this commandant at Belsen Camp, and he says, just like thus, the commandant at Belsen Camp going home for the day with fumes of human roast. So this logical connector is used to juxtapose the behavior of the commandant to that of the vulture. It connects the two. He identifies perhaps that charnel house as Belsen concentration camp, where the Jews and the other prisoners were held and killed. Their bodies were often incinerated or burned. And you will remember about Anne Frank, who was killed here with 50,000 others, and the camp was liberated in 1945. So the commandant that we read of here was a German officer in charge of a camp or a unit. This section of the poem focuses now on the commandant of that camp as he leaves at the end of the day. So as a reader, we now start to think, okay, but what is he saying? Why is he comparing these vultures to the commander? How are they similar? And the words human roast refers to the victims in the concentration camp, as if they were being cooked. This is an absolutely shocking phrase. It's very visual in its description, but it's very effective in conveying the message. Achebe's description of him stresses the thoroughly unpleasant side that was experienced in these concentration camps. So from this we get that the commandant's job was to execute people. The fact that he's able to breathe and live normally while the smell of their deaths are in his nostrils is absolutely horrific and absolutely sad. Here's a picture of Belsen concentration camp. You can see there's the signpost. So this is actual footage just to give you an idea of the horrific reality that they faced. So then continuing with section 3, this smell is clinging rebelliously to his hairy nostrils. So hairy nostrils here brings us back to the idea of the feathers of the vultures, and it really creates this image that both of them are absolutely ugly. And the smell is clinging rebelliously. It doesn't want to let go. It refuses to go away even after he has left the camp. And then he does something strange. He stops at a wayside sweet shop and picks up a chocolate. So we see a different side of the commandant. Just as he demonstrated the affection between the pair of vultures, we now see the speaker illustrates this ability to love someone else, even though he is killing people and burning them out of hatred. He picks up this chocolate for his tender offspring. So that's a very interesting choice of words here. Offspring is usually what we use to describe the babies of animals, not so much humans, but it gives us again that reminder of, remember the vultures that were showing love to each other? Now we have yet another image of something that revolts us, disgusts us, and shocks us. And in a way, we perhaps see him as animalistic because he's able to do this. But Achebe also creates a feeling of a loving family. And we see that the children are waiting at home for daddy's return. They are blissfully unaware of what their father's work involves. They await his homecoming and enjoys the chocolate that he brings them, because to them, he's just an ordinary father that is loving them and showing them that he cares for them by bringing them some treats. So we are introduced to these contrasting sides, the fact that he's able to do evil, he's able to kill people and go home still with this smell of the burning flesh in his nose and show love towards his child. Now we move on to the last section, and this is now the fourth section, in which Achebe presents us with two alternative conclusions to draw from. He suggests that we might praise bounteous providence, and the phrase "if you will," which suggests that he is giving an alternative that he would prefer us to choose, perhaps. He's asking us to either rejoice that an ogre, which is of course what we associate a monster with, has a tiny glowworm tenderness. So he's using a metaphor to describe this element of love that lights up like a glowworm the commandant's otherwise despicable life. And he even goes as far as to use another metaphor. The love is encapsulated in icy caverns of a cruel heart, to convey how cold the commandant's heart is. So just looking at these lines first though, praise bounteous. So this is really biblical language which refers to all the good things God gives to mankind. So we must give bounteous praise for this that we have received. And then I said an ogre, of course, is a type of monster, which again symbolizes evil, bringing us back to that evil, ominous tone that we had in the first stanza or section. The glowworm makes us think of love, because it's almost like it makes his heart light up. So in this metaphor, the image describes the element of love that lights up like a glowworm the commandant's otherwise despicable life. And then, like I said, there's a second metaphor here where his heart is described as an icy cave that is now filled with warmth, when we introduce the idea of his family that he cares for. And there's of course the alliteration caverns of a cruel heart, which emphasizes this cold, cruel nature of the commandant. But then he gives us the alternative. He says, or be happy that this commandant and everybody that he represents has the ability to also have a little bit of love in him, or despair, be sad. For in the very germ, and germ here suggests that love and hate can blossom in all of us. It can grow. Plants usually germinate, right? So they start to grow from a seed. And he says that here love and hate can grow in all of us. So, or else despair, for in the very germ of that kindred love is lodged the perpetuity of evil. So in that very same heart is the possibility for infinite perpetuity, meaning continuing forever, infinite evil. So in the final section of this poem, one can despair because that same person can be evil forever, or we can be happy because he has the potential for love forever in the same being. And of course, for the exam, you'll have to definitely be able to put these two choices into your own words. Please don't quote them from the poem. You will have to give some evidence from the poem, but I want you to be able to put that choice in your own words, that every single human being, according to Achebe, has the ability to have both good and evil within them. And this can grow, and we can either be happy because bad people are capable of good things, or we can be sad that good people are capable of really evil and bad and cruel things. And that is the essence of Achebe's poem.